In the 3-minute thesis competition, you compete with other graduate students at UNC Charlotte to see who can do this the best. It is, such a good thing to work on and to do. Just by participating, I think you get a pretty valuable bullet point to put on your resume. We will also give you a recording of your presentation. And you could use this in a couple of ways. This is something you could take to your advisor or some other mentor and sit down and evaluate it and talk about how you could have done it better, what would make it even more engaging and understandable. Or if you think it was just awesome, you can post this on your website, on your LinkedIn profile, a whole host of places that will help get play and get engagement with your research. And there's prize money. So we have increased the prize money this year to be $750 for first place, $400 for second, and $300 for third place. And this is a credit, right, on your student account that you should be able to get as a refund, or it could go towards any balance that you might have on your student account. So that's a great reason to go. Plus, the winner of the UNC Charlotte 3-minute thesis competition gets an all-expense paid trip to Raleigh, North Carolina to compete. I know, it's exciting, to compete in the regional round. So there's a lot of possibilities here, including a luxurious trip to Raleigh. So we don't just want to throw you into the experience without any tips or help. And that's why we've asked Dr. Elise Demeter to run this session on preparing for your 3MT presentation. Dr. Demeter is Senior Assessment Research Analyst for the Office of Assessment and Accreditation here at UNC Charlotte in our Academic Affairs Department. That's her day job. But she's also kind of a SciComm expert, and it's really wearing that hat that she's done a lot of different workshops for us, including this one today. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to you, Elise, and thank you for being here to do this.
Thank you so much, Jill. Thank you for that introduction and kickoff. I'm really excited to be with you all today. I always enjoy doing these workshops with the Center for Graduate Life. And so I'm just excited to be with you all today and talking about communicating our research specifically in the context of 3MT. I think it's going to be a lot of fun for us all. I'm going to share my screen. Give me a second to do that. And I'm going to set up here so I can also still see the chat coming in. Cool. So as we're meeting today, if anyone has any feedback along the way, feel free to put that into the chat. I'll have a couple of times where I'm asking you guys to put in information for me into the chat, but if there's something you need to communicate to me, certainly use the chat function to do that. And I've got it up on my screen so I can see that for you all. So I'm going to put in the chat a link here to a public Google Drive. These are my slides from today, as well as handouts for you all. So hopefully you can be able to access them and use them and refer to them both now and in the future as you're moving forward in this journey. So as Jill said, I'm Dr. Elise Demeter. We're going to talk about how to communicate your research today. I talk a lot about science communication on Twitter. So if you want to follow me, that's my Twitter handle. I tend to retweet and forward good practices about science communication, as well as job and training opportunities that I see. So as Jill said, I'm in the Office of Assessment and Accreditation. That's in Fretwell. And so I have this lovely picture of our Fretwell building here. I am a cognitive neuroscientist by training. And before I came to UNC Charlotte, I was at Duke. And while I was there, I had the pleasure of being part of a science communication fellowship. That was really for faculty and postdocs who wanted training in communicating their research to broader public audiences. And when I came to UNC Charlotte, I quickly realized that there wasn't the same kind of training and opportunities necessarily here for UNC Charlotte folks. And so I've been developing these workshops for graduate students in partnership with the Center for Graduate Life and Learning. I also give similar workshops for our undergraduate researchers to start training them in good communication practices as well. So I'd love to get a sense of sort of who's in the room with me. So if you could use the chat function and put in the department that you're affiliated with or what your research is affiliated with, that'll give me a sense of some of the disciplines in the room. So I'll be looking for that in the chat. I see public health, English. Thanks, Haley, for that message. Education, computer science, kinesiology, bioinformatics, transportation engineering. Oh, I think that's a new one for me. Electrical engineering. Okay. Lots of sciences represented, but certainly a few of our education and humanities disciplines as well. That's very exciting. Because I'm a scientist, I'll tend to sometimes use the shorthand of science communication out of habit in these talks, but no, I mean research communication very broadly. And I really value the folks here who are here from the humanities as well. I think Haley told me I needed to update my share settings. So try that link, folks, for your handouts and see if that works for you. I made that publicly accessible. All right. Thank you all for that. Telling me all of your disciplines. It's helpful for me to use examples that are relevant to you guys in these talks. So we're here today to talk about how to do 3-minute thesis. As Dr. Huerta said, this is a format where it's one slide, 3 minutes to explain the breadth and significance of your research project to a non-specialist audience. And typically there are judges involved in the 3MT competition who could be, say, like politicians from the state of North Carolina, personalities who are in media, perhaps from the Charlotte region. It could be maybe faculty or administrators from UNC Charlotte, but certainly definitely members of the public as well who are not academic researchers. As Jill's saying, we had Tommy Thompson from NPR in 2020, and that was very exciting. So certainly you're talking to a broad range of people here when you're giving this. So one of my handouts I have in there has details about the judging criteria for 3MT specifically, so you can take a peek at that. But I do want to talk about this PhD chat cartoon here, which I really like because I felt like it was actually a really good summary of what to do for 3MT. So your 3-minute thesis, minute 1, why are you doing it? Minute 2, how are you doing it? That's your methods and results right there in minute 2. And then minute 3, how it relates to the real world. And I think this is interesting because it's a pretty good breakdown actually of what would make a really good, compelling 3-minute thesis presentation. And I think you're already probably surprised to notice, hey, I'm really used to talking about minute 2 there, that methods and results. That's usually like the bulk of my presentations in academic research settings. And here you're telling me that that's 1/3 of what I should be saying in the 3-minute thesis competition. So what do we put into minute 1? What do we put into minute 3? How do we frame this? How do we have a solid conclusion? That's some of the content that we're going to be talking about together today. So I have some tips here for your background slide. Your background slide needs to be one static slide. That could either be one large image, or that could be a slide with multiple smaller images. So sort of like if you think of a a multi-panel figure that you might see in a grant or a paper. You can kind of use the same approach here of having multiple small images or figures, but each image really needs to be intentional, and it really should be connected to a piece of your verbal pitch. So you want your audience to clearly be able to relate, that figure, that image, that's connecting in with what I'm hearing you say. I am thinking back to that 2020 competition, and one of the really interesting presentations that was done there was actually the person who won UNC Charlotte's competition that day, had a really unexpected and surprising slide for folks. When he got up to do his presentation, the people helping out turned on his slide, and it was just blue. The whole screen was just bright, bright, bright blue. And our audio and visual tech people sort of paused for a second. Do I have this right? Is this really what you meant to show? It looks like the projector is malfunctioning. And the speaker, was able to turn this into like a joke to start off his 3-minute thesis spiel. Like, no, actually what you're seeing, that is indeed correct. The equipment's not malfunctioning here. Blue, as it turns out, is the hardest color to create for digital devices. And instantly, because of that unexpectedness of what his slide was, everybody's attention was immediately captivated. We were all engaged. We all wanted to find out now more about the color blue, because that was just a really effective way of grabbing our attention. One big blue slide. But certainly I've seen a variety of different effective techniques there, including people showing little bits of data and figures or simple bar graphs, showing pictures to kind of give a sense of what materials might look like, what methods might look like, the setting that's involved, the people that are involved in research. You can really be creative with this part. If there's questions along the way, feel free to put them in the chat. Oops. All right, so I always say when we're talking about communicating your research to non-expert audiences, the thing that we have to do first is explain why we're doing this research and why should we care about doing this research, and convince others of that fact. And so I'm going to live into that principle today by telling you why I think we should share our research with non-expert audiences. So communicating to the public at large, it's really important. We have the opportunity as researchers to shape public discourse, and we can even influence public policy with our findings and our work. It's really nice to be able to give effective presentations. This makes us more effective in our classrooms. It is helpful when we're giving academic conference presentations and talks, certainly. But we also want to be able to give effective presentations to different types of audiences. So that could be in a media interview that's going to be televised, for example. That could be on a podcast. That could be just sharing your work verbally in an informal way with either students or people in the public at large. I also always like to make this really practical for people listening to this talk. And so being able to communicate well about your research will also be helpful when you are on the job market, when you're looking to land a job post-graduation. So whether that's in academia and continuing on in an academic institution, or whether that's in industry, you'll certainly be asked to speak about your research at UNC Charlotte and what it was you're doing. And to be able to effectively describe what your research was, and to be able to make the interviewer care and understand the significance of what you were doing and how what you were doing can translate to the job that you're applying for, how it can be applicable, how the skills or expertise you gain could be relevant to the job that you are interviewing for. That will help you just nail that interview and really kind of help you stand apart from the pack. So I always say when people have excellent research skills and you combine that with really strong communication skills, that's gold on the job market. That will really be a fantastic way to set yourself apart from other candidates. So one barrier that we might face when we're talking about our research is a cognitive bias that all humans suffer from, and it's called the curse of knowledge. And what the curse of knowledge is it's essentially saying, once you become an expert at something, once you gain a lot of specific domain knowledge, it can be about anything, you tend to forget what it was like to be a novice. You forget what it was like at the beginning of that journey when you started gaining knowledge about this particular topic or discipline. And so you'll start assuming and presuming that other people that you're talking to have the same background knowledge, know the same things that you do, even though of course they do not. And so I think we've all probably come across this situation of the curse of knowledge before. You can tell me in the chat if you've ever had, say, like a faculty member that you worked with, or maybe somebody who taught either a graduate course or an undergraduate course that you took. And maybe you could tell that they were definitely a content expert. They were very knowledgeable about their particular discipline or their particular niche area of research. But maybe they had a hard time communicating that effectively to you as a student in a way that you understand. You can tell me in the chat if anyone's ever had that kind of experience. Erin is saying, yes, exclamation point. I'll tell you, when I do this with undergraduates, everybody raises their hand and says, yeah, I've had an instructor like that before. So this is something I think we all have to be sensitive to. As graduate students, you're definitely becoming experts in your field of knowledge, in your specific research discipline. You still have the advantage of being early career. And so you remember what it's like a little bit better than maybe your more seasoned faculty, what it's like to be starting out in this area. What questions did you have? What misunderstandings did you have? What things were really like surprising for you to learn when you first got started? I want you to think about those. I want you to hold on to those little tidbits, because that is what you need to think about whenever you're talking about your research to others, even if that's simply other academics who aren't in your specific subdiscipline, right? All of those things that you maybe found confusing or surprising or were difficult to understand, they might find the same. And so being able to tap into that novice mindset, what it was like when you were a beginner just starting out, it's really valuable when you want to start communicating to other audiences. So as academics, when we're taught how to communicate, we are taught to think about all of the background and all of the work that came before us. So we talk about the literature and the findings in the field and give a literature review about what's been done on our topic before. We'll go into all of our methods in depth and all of the details about what we've done. And then we tell you our results, and then we tell you our conclusions. And of course, we're going to qualify those conclusions quite a bit. So we'll say things like, well, under these circumstances, with these limitations, with these things to be kept in mind, and these future unknowns, and you know, maybe in this case, but not in all cases, right? We're going to qualify all of our conclusions of our research. And that's really not the way the public wants to hear about our work. Instead, the way the public would like to hear about your research is they would like first for you to tell them your big conclusion, your big bottom line, your headline. This is the big exciting thing that I found or that I'm working on. Then they want to know, well, so what? Why does that matter to me? Why should I care about that? So that's where you have to connect into what people value and what is personal and significant to them. So you appeal to those personal things that they care about and connect your research into them, right? That's so what, why should you care? And then if you've crossed those two bridges successfully, then we want to hear the supporting details, something about how you've done it, some more details about what you found, what you're planning to do next. That's where you can get into more the nitty gritty. So if you look, this script is really flipped from what we're taught as academics. And so it really requires a really different mindset and approach when you're talking to any type of broader audience in general. I've heard it said that we are living in a post-truth world. And so what does it mean for us to be researchers and academics in a post-truth world? If we're in a society where we can debate about different sets of facts and what your truth is might be different than my truth, and well, even if this isn't supported by fact, well, I feel like it should be true, so therefore I'm going to value it just as much as hard and cold facts. That's a challenging environment for us to navigate as researchers and as people coming from academic and university, higher ed type settings. And so learning how to communicate your research and why it matters to the public, I think has never been more challenging and has never been more important. We can think of a ton of examples in the past couple of years about why good communication about science and about research findings matters for the public. We're living through a global pandemic. We've had many debates on these issues, and we've seen good communication and we've seen bad communication on these fronts, and we know the stakes are high and it matters. I also like to always bring in the example of climate change as an example of communication that has gone wrong in the past. So climate change scientists, when they were talking about these same phenomenon in, say, the 1990s or the early 2000s, the buzzword in the vocabulary at that time was all global warming. The planet is warming, the planet is getting warmer, we're on a trajectory of global warming. And that was really the buzzword that everybody was taught and heard. And that didn't really connect in to people and their experiences and what they cared about, and doesn't really make sense to folks. And so the American public largely said, we don't care. Like, we're not understanding, we're not getting this doesn't matter to me. Why should I care about global warming? I'm not seeing that in my everyday life. And now you'll notice that this vocabulary has really changed in more recent years, and it's been recontextualized now as climate change. And you'll start to hear this connected into lots of different situations. The more extreme hurricanes that we're experiencing, radio broadcasters will connect in how warmer oceans are leading to more severe hurricanes and more damaging hurricanes. Well, that's something people start to care about. We talk about the droughts, the fires out west, and how they've been more severe and more widespread than in the past, and connecting that into the effects of climate change. And you'll notice that's a really distinct change in the vocabulary, and it has implications then for what we can understand as part of what global warming is doing, is creating climate change, which can mean a lot of different things and don't all have to mean the temperature of the planet, but could indeed mean things like more severe weather, more severe fires, droughts, etc. So that's really changed the public's understanding. There was an NPR article recently talking about the new climate change report that was going to come out. And the focus really was on how climate change scientists have done a really poor job communicating their work to the public. And there's now a new and renewed emphasis on how they can do better at educating the American public about what it is they do, what it is they know, and how they know it, and why, and most importantly, why should we care about it? So with that in mind, I'm going to talk to you today about how you all can level up in your skills for communicating to the public at large. This is absolutely relevant for 3MT, but we're also talking about skills that are translatable here to a whole variety of settings that you might encounter in your future. So I want you to keep that in mind. Good for 3MT, but good for life as well. Whenever I'm doing this sort of introduction to how to communicate your research, I really like to talk about elevator pitches. An elevator pitch, you may have heard of it. It's something that verbally communicates your great idea or your research in the context of the benefits to society. It's typically short, maybe as short as 30 seconds, but definitely max 3 minutes. And the idea is that this is a pitch that you could get in an elevator with somebody, say, hey, I have this great idea I'd like to tell you about. Talk to them in the span of time it takes you to reach your floor, your destination. And by the time they are exiting the elevator, they'll say, hey, that was really interesting. I'd love to hear more. Here's my card. Let's set a follow-up meeting to talk about this further. And so in that short amount of time, it is impossible to cram all aspects of your work into that kind of pitch. You really have to think about how to distill and hone your message down to the highlights. And an effective pitch indeed will want your audience to tell you more. They'll have follow-up questions for you, and that's a sign that they've been really engaged and that they're really wanting to learn more now. And then after they ask the follow-up questions, that's where you can fill in additional details. So certainly a 3-minute presentation is a really well-polished elevator pitch. And so we're going to talk about that today. That'll be how you can do a 3-minute thesis presentation, but I also, again, want you to think about how you can translate this to other settings in the future beyond the scope of 3MT as well. So how would you develop your pitch, your verbal pitch? I say the first step is always to think about who your audience is and identifying your audience, and really important, what matters to them. And then once you've thought about their values, you want to frame your pitch to reflect your audience's values. So you might change your framing for different audiences. We talked about this idea of prioritizing information. You're really providing the highlights. What are your findings? Why is this relevant to my audience? Okay, the big take-home messages. We'll talk about this a few times today, this idea of avoiding jargon. We are guilty in academia, certainly, definitely in the sciences, of using a lot of jargon and technical terms. And that vocabulary puts distance between ourselves and our audience. I find it's this common misconception for students and people starting out in research where they think, you know, I've spent all this time learning these fancy words. That's how I should speak. That's the words I should use. That's the language I should use. That's not really a good communication practice when you're talking to a broad audience. You want to use simple and clear language. So we'll talk about how to avoid jargon. I am a scientist. I use numbers and statistics all the time in my work. I will tell you it's a good practice when you're communicating to large audiences to use those numbers sparingly. All right, so you can talk about them, but most broad audiences, they don't want to know your t-values and your p-values and things 3 decimal points, right? They want to know just big round numbers. When you're introducing new concepts, using metaphors and analogies are really helpful. We'll also talk about the idea of specific examples, and storytelling is a really good tool for communication. And then finally, my tip number 7 here, even if you're delivering your pitch verbally, it's always a good idea to write it out. And then you're going to practice saying it again and again and get feedback on it. But write it out because that will help you choose your words well. And it will also give you a chance to think about exactly what you want to say, edit it, and you're going to be able to more effectively get rid of some of those filler words that you might have, like the ums and the likes and the such as, if you were just delivering it live. When you're practicing, and if you're practicing for 3MT, I will suggest that you practice either to camera, like set up your own Zoom meeting, for example, or turn on your video camera and do that. You can even do this on your phone, or practice in front of your roommate, somebody you know. It doesn't really matter who it is, if it's a camera or a person, but doing that will really help simulate that situation of being live in front of an audience. And that's a really good way to practice and make sure that you got all of those nerves worked out ahead of time. So I said step number 1 was to identify your audience. So certainly your audience could be people attending the 3-minute thesis competition and the judges who are rating you according to the criteria that they've been asked to rate you on. But there could be other contexts as well that you're communicating to, like other research conferences. You could be talking to a journalist about your work. You could be talking to people who are in policymaking, or let's say the staff of people who are elected officials. You could be talking to popular press readers through a blog. You could be on a podcast or a radio interview talking about your work and your research. Or you could just be talking to your neighbors, your friends, your family, etc. So these are all different audiences that could care about sort of different aspects of your work. And so then we have to think about, well, what would be for my audience their so what? What would they care about? And so you want to think about, well, why should this audience care about my work? What about them? What about it is important for them to know? Why am I talking to them about it today? Here's where you want to think about really the personal connections. How does this issue that I'm doing research on, how could it affect them or someone that they love? So for this, folks who work on things like potential medical treatments for different disorders or diseases, they could talk about how prevalent a given type of cancer is. It affects 1 out of 400 Americans, nice round number. You could talk about how this impacts things like consumer devices we might be interested in, your everyday life, things you might want to do in your everyday life, areas that affect our society, our kids, people we love. Think about these values, think about what it is that hooks into your research question. And this requires a little bit of time and thought, typically, for people to think about this so what and answer that really well. So I talked about this idea that your message might differ depending on who you're talking to. And so I like this image for thinking about that point. So you have your message, it's your research, that part hasn't really changed. But as you think about, well, what matters to my audience, they're like a prism. They're going to refract your message through this different lens. And so you have to think about the right lens to frame your pitch for that given audience. So a policymaker wants to know, well, is this work you're doing, is it in line with my agenda? Is this something my constituents care about? Is this something that affects people that I represent? Is that why I need to care about your research? If you're talking to the media, they want to know, is this newsworthy? Is it timely? Is it going to sell? Is it going to make a compelling, interesting story that my audience would like to hear about? If you're speaking to NGOs or other types of foundations that might fund research projects, they want to know, how does this fit in with our mission? How does this fit in with our portfolio of research and things that we like to fund? How do you hook into those values and demonstrate that connection? And so you can see how you might think about reframing your message based on who is that audience member that you're talking to. So a common issue I see with students when they're first starting out, or early career researchers, when they're starting out about communicating their research to others in either academic or non-academic settings, is they tend to want to jump right into the deep end of the pool, bring out lots of details, lots of technical stuff right up front, really launch right into the thick of things. And that's going to leave your audience really lost. And so what should we do instead? First thing, you have to give people the big picture context. Tell them what area you're working in. Okay, I asked you guys all your discipline right up front, right? I want to know I'm working in biology, and specifically within biology, then I'm working on this topic. And in that topic, this is my research question. So give people that big picture context, the big picture issue first, before you get into what your specific research question is. You have to orient people to what type of research out of all the possibilities in the world, what is it you're working on first before you get into all those nitty-gritty details. So don't jump into the deep end of the pool, prioritize that big picture first. All right, so we talked about this a little bit before. This is best practice, avoid jargon. Can you put into the chat for me some technical terms or jargon that are specific to your research discipline or the question that you are working on in your research settings? Ooh, I have an acronym, ELL. I have no idea what that means. Bathymetry, I have no idea what that means either, Tyler. What else we got, folks? Social capital, okay, I like that. Oh, he's English language learners, I got that. Okay, compiler, metagenomics, these are good words, folks. These are very good jargon. I think it's great to have others outside of your discipline flag words that they're not familiar with. You want to be able to communicate to everyone in your audience. And I'm a scientist. I have a PhD in science. Some of these are science terms, but I'll tell you, I don't exactly know what all of these things are. I still have no idea what, Tyler, what your bathymetry is. I have no idea what that is. So if I don't know what it is, why should anyone else know what it is, right? So you want to think about making your work accessible here. So it's fine to use technical terms, and sometimes that's the best word to use in a situation, but you want to define it really clearly first. And to define it, you're going to have to use simpler, clearer words to explain what it is you mean by that term before you go on and use it. I will suggest you avoid acronyms because acronyms are just really confusing. And while we love acronyms because they save us space when we're writing, they're really not necessary in everyday language. We tend to use them as shorthand when we're talking to, say, people who work in our lab settings or with our research advisor, but they don't make sense to anyone outside of that context. So we really want to think about how do we best communicate in a broad and accessible way. My second point on here is this idea about using numbers and statistics sparingly. So I do a lot of work on UNC Charlotte as part of my research program. I study student learning and student success. And when I talk to audiences beyond UNC Charlotte about our institution, I like to give a little bit of context about who we are. And so I'll talk about things like our student body size. And I don't say to folks, we are 30,346 students with this number of undergrads and this number of graduate students. Nobody cares to that head count of the number. So instead, I'll say things like, at UNC Charlotte, we are 30,000 students strong and growing. Round numbers are easy for people to remember and hence are better for communicating. If you are working in a field where you're working on either a very big scale or a very small scale, it can be helpful to give people some comparisons that they can relate to. So I'm working on nanoparticles, and a nanoparticle would be 1/100th of the size of a tip of a pen. Okay, I know what the tip of a pen looks like, so now I can draw down from that about how small it is of a scale that you're working on. So you can think about what might be relevant to you in the numbers you might want to use and how you might give people a size of this. If there's a size or scope to your work, how you might communicate that fact. So I talked about this before a little bit, the idea of using metaphors and analogies for new concepts. When we're teaching a new concept, it's nice to relate it to something that people already know and understand. And so this is why metaphors are really a powerful teaching and communication technique. I was a biologist as an undergrad. That was my major. And so I'm going to use a biology example here. If I'm talking about cellular structure and the structures that make up a cell, I might use the metaphor of the cell as a city. And I might say something like that the mitochondria are like the power plant of the city. Okay, they produce energy for the cell to use. You know what a power plant is. We know what happens when we don't have power. We know how much we rely and use and how well integrated power is to everything that we do and that we need. I get that. We need energy. So now understanding that mitochondria are like the power plants of the cell. Okay, now I understand what mitochondria are and their fundamental role as part of the cell's infrastructure. And so you can think about what might be some good metaphors or analogies you can use to talk to people, to talk about these new concepts that are going to be unfamiliar to folks. What's something that they might know about that you can relate it to? And it's okay if your analogies and your metaphors are sort of simplistic. You can use a simple metaphor first, get that understanding laid out, and then build the complexity from there. So I always say good practice is to say these basic things explicitly. Again, that curse of knowledge, sometimes we start assuming people know those basics because we know them because we're experts. Just say them out loud. Say all those basics right out loud. We talked about this idea of defining your terms and your acronyms. It actually makes you look smarter when you define things clearly so that your audience understands. Sometimes I've gotten this question from students like, well, if I'm explaining this concept and like really it's something that people in my field, they really know, I promise you even the biggest expert in your field would appreciate a really clear and good explanation of basic constructs. If you can nail that well, that will actually garner a lot of appreciation and respect for you, much more so than if you're just tossing around all this expertise and jargon and technical terms without laying out those definitions really clearly. Stories are extremely powerful tools. As I said, I was a cognitive neuroscientist, and so I can tell you that People's brains, we love stories. Stories are really memorable to us. And I love this visual. It's a friend of mine who created this, and he has this picture of Legos as data sorted, arranged, presented visually. I think of this as the bar graphs we love to use in research settings, right? And then explained with a story. When you use a story to tell your research, people will understand both the gist of what you're doing and they'll remember that. And they're more likely to remember some of your concrete details as well. And they're very, very effective communication tools. There's a great book called Made to Stick. You guys can check it out. And it talks about all sorts of reasons why certain ideas really catch on in the public consciousness. And they talk about how sticky ideas, and these could be things like media campaigns, for example, or products that really caught on and went viral. They talk about what made them sticky ideas. They tend to be simple, unexpected, concrete, meaning they have a lot of concrete physical details to them. They're credible. In this case, you as the researcher bring the credibility through your own expertise and credentials. You are the credible part of your idea. Emotional, we talked about connecting into those personal values that people have. That's their emotional appeal. And they tell a story. So a good story makes a sticky idea. A sticky idea is a really memorable idea. I saw this great TikTok science communication challenge recently. It's called the Oversimplification Challenge. Is to take a concept from your research and think about, okay, well, how would I communicate that idea? I say in an honors thesis here, but you could think about in a journal article, for example, in your field. And then, well, how could you rewrite that statement to make it simpler? Simpler is probably going to be incomplete. You'll probably leave out a couple of details. That's okay. But how could you iterate on that and make it simpler and simpler and simpler and simpler until you get to the point where what you're saying is no longer accurate. It's no longer an accurate description of your research. Okay, we'll back it up from there. We don't want to be inaccurate in our communications, but if we move up a level or two, now we're probably at a nice sweet spot where we're communicating in a simple way, an accessible way, but we're still maintaining the accuracy of what we're saying. So I think that this is a useful practice to engage in when you're thinking about how to talk to others. So I'm going to challenge you guys to think about this through the UPGoer 5 text editor. So if you could copy that link and put it into a web browser on your end. And this is a challenge where it asks you to explain a hard concept using only the 1,000 most common words in the English language. I'm putting that link in the chat now for you. I think that should work for you. So I want you to go to this website and see if you can think about something from your research or some keywords from your research, put it in the chat or put it in the text box for that website. And when you do so, and you submit the text that you've entered into this text box, it'll put a little red squiggle under any word that wasn't in its database of the 1,000 most used words in the English language. They'll get a little flag kind of looking like a spell check or grammar editing check on your work. So I want you to start using that tool and start thinking about how can I explain something from my research and get it past this test of the UPGoer 5 text editor. It's really hard. It's kind of addictive to try to beat this system. And so I'll show you an example from my work while you guys are working on this. And then I'd like you to share out in the chat what you are learning as well. So I tried the UPGoer 5 challenge on a piece of work that I did. I have this sentence here that I published in an academic article. It was given the information overload often imparted to human cognitive processing systems, it's a technical term there, suppression of irrelevant and distracting information is essential for successful behavior. And of course, that did not make it past the UPGoer 5's challenge. So I had to really rewrite that and rewrite that. And what I ended on was your past matters for what you now pay attention to and for what you now ignore. And you'll notice it wasn't about simply substituting words and finding more common synonyms for a given word, but I really had to think about really reframing and rewriting this concept. So I'm still conveying this concept Okay, your past experiences are now influencing what you're paying attention to and what you're remembering and what you're ignoring and forgetting. Okay, but it's not just about subbing in synonyms, it's really about rephrasing it all together to convey that sentiment in a new way. So put into the chat for me some of the things that you're finding that are not allowed. I see this is difficult, machine, and daily, both not allowed. Okay, you could try every day and see if every day is 2 words, maybe gets past it. Height's not allowed, protection is not allowed. Social capital and developmental disability, none are allowed. Yeah, I would think that those are not common words. Resilience is not allowed. All right, now is anyone finding a good, different way of explaining their work that would get past the upgoer 5? And Tyler is defining for me bathymetry, which is what the bottom of a body of water looks like. Ooh, very good. I think water is actually not in this database of 1,000 most commonly used words, but water to me is a very simple word, and I think one that everybody understands. So I think it's a good word to use nonetheless. All right, Nicholas is saying diversity, climate motivating, not allowed. All right, so what are some things that you are getting past the upgoer 5? What are some phrases you're finding do work to talk about your research? Really stretch yourself here to think about communicating in a simpler way. People need each other. I like that, Jessica. Is that your social capital, Jessica? People need each other? She says yes. Okay, David Brown says, making food safer using computers. Oh, I like that, David. I don't know how we make food safer using computers, but I'm curious to know more now. So I often find people think this challenge is really difficult, and they'll start saying, you know, 1,000 words, that's so restrictive. And like, do we really need to be this simplistic? Okay, water is not allowed. How can I even talk about my research if we can't use these words that are still pretty basic? So I need to think about that simplicity challenge, okay? Upgoer 5 is a great way to really challenge yourself to break through concepts down very, very simply. Doesn't mean you have to live at that most simple level. You can back it up a step or two and still probably be at a sweeter spot for communicating to broad audiences than maybe where you started with your technical terms. All right, so I hope you guys think this is fun. I have a lot of fun playing around with this. So thank you for sharing out what you did. I appreciate that. I really like some of these examples of what wasn't allowed and what was allowed instead. There's another resource I want to share with you all, and this is this idea of a message box. I really like this tool. It's something that a company called Compass Science Communication put together. They work with scientists and researchers to talk about their big work, their great ideas to the public at large in effective spaces. And I encourage you to look at their website for more resources because they are excellent at what they do. But they have one resource in particular called this message box that I want you to think about using as you're developing your 3MT pitch. I've used this when I'm grant writing to help me think about, like, how do I really explain this idea of what we're interested in doing well? What are these different things I need to think about to help me think about why is this intellectually significant work? Why is this work going to have impact to society, right? It helps me think through these issues. So the message box, it's an actual box, right, that you can fill out as on a worksheet. And so it kind of gets you out of that it could get you into a non-linear thinking space. You can start really at any point of the box and filling it out. But it asks you to identify your audience, who's impacted by this. The center of the box, this is your issue. That's what I talked about, is like the big picture of your work. So if you were thinking about your work in terms of keywords that you would put into Google to find information about your topic, what would those keywords be? What's your area or discipline? And then you can go up to the problem. This is thinking more specifically about your research question. and the specific theory or hypotheses that you are testing. Your solution is the answer, or the way that you're approaching to answer that problem. And so this is the methods and the findings that you're bringing to bear to answer that research question. The benefits, this is where we think big again. We're thinking about society. What are the benefits to society? Who does it help and how does it help? Both in the very short term and in the longer term. So there could be different time scales to think about for benefits. If everybody adopted your great idea, what would be the immediate benefits to them? And what would be the benefits to society, like on the whole, what would be better? And then on the flip of the benefits, we get to that so what? This is again when we make it really personal and specific. What does your audience value? How does it impact them or somebody they care about? So again, making that benefit instead of to society, now it's to the person in front of me. And so I'd like you to think about this. I have a blank version of the message box in the handout folder that I gave you. And I want you to think about this and how you might develop your message. So I'm going to ask you to think about what the judges and the audience might value about your work. This is really the key to communicating. Why should they care about what it is you're doing? Why should I give you 3 minutes worth of my attention? My other tip when you're communicating in 3-minute thesis would be to think about including this specific example in your pitch, tell a story to your audience. It doesn't really matter, if your story can be a completely fictional example that you've made up, or it could be something from your personal life about how you got into this work or what in this work matters. But thinking about how we convey our work through some type of story is really helpful for people to hang their hats on. So in the chat for me, why don't you do this? Put some things you've been thinking about as we've been talking here today about what a broad audience and the 3MD judges, what would be something that they would value about your work? What would be your so what for that audience? Why would they care? Put a few things into the chat for me. Tyler is talking about getting younger students interested in STEM concepts, educating future scientists and researchers and the public at large. Okay, so Tyler, why should we care about getting younger students interested in STEM concepts? Why is that important to me? All right, here's another one. Finding out something is wrong with my washing machine, even when, oh, I lost space. Even when it is not making noticeable noises, so I can avoid owing a debt to my landlord. Oh, that sounds like an exciting story you could tell. Imagine you have the technology, smart home technology that enables you to know if one of your appliances is malfunctioning and then what you can do to remedy that at home, both without an expensive repairman or causing, extra harm to that appliance up front. That could be interesting. Nicholas here has motivating English language learners to read. We can talk about what English language learners means as well. If these students are able to connect to a sense of relevancy to what they're reading, and if what they're reading is relevant to them, their attitudes and motivation towards reading has the potential to increase. That's true about all learners, actually. People like to think that are motivated when what they're learning is authentic to them and authentic to their lived experiences, and they can make those connections between the topic that they're learning in, say, a classroom setting and their personal lives or the lives of, like, say, their family members. Those increase motivations quite a bit. I like these suggestions, guys. These are good so whats. I always like to sort of start wrapping up this session with thinking about tips for speaking to the public, because when you do your 3-minute thesis competition, it's a live to audience, you in 3-minute pitch. And I know many people are not inherently really comfortable with public speaking. So I always suggest, and this is true for 3-minute thesis, and it's true for just talks in general, I always suggest to people that they over practice their introduction and any transition points in their talk. Those are typically the hardest to get through well. So if you over practice those, you'll be really kind of shoring up those sticking points and be able to better avoid them when you deliver your speech. I also find why you should practice your introduction. You stand up to give a talk, right? It's a little nerve-wracking. You get that adrenaline pumping, and adrenaline, it tends to speed up our speech. We start talking really, 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 really fast, and we want to start jumping in. You've heard the presentations where people are just going like this at warp speed. And so if you practice that introduction a lot, it will enable you to do this other tip I have for you, which is to slow down. When you are giving your introduction and when you're talking right up front, slow your pace of speech down. And what sounds slow to your adrenaline-fueled ear will actually sound completely normal to the audience in front of you, who is paying attention to, well, who are you? What do you look like? What are you saying? What's the tone of your voice? I'm getting used to what you're saying. You'll sound completely normal to your audience, even if to you it's like feeling effortlessly slow, right? That's a great tip. You want to pronounce words clearly, of course. You want to speak loud enough for your audience to hear. It's always great to use a mic to be very accessible to everybody in the room. I often have trouble with this next tip I'll give you, which is to vary the pitch and the tone of your voice. So whether that's speaking much more loudly to really emphasize a point, or you're speaking a lot more softly to really get people to lean in and say, this is the really cool part about what I found. That is really good for keeping people's attention. It avoids that kind of monotone that people want to drown out. It helps keep people engaged. So I find this is something I have to really think about and work on in my own talks that I deliver, this varying the pitch, varying the tone and the volume. Helps you emphasize key points, and it helps keep your audience engaged. Of course, you want to think about avoiding the filler words. Lots and lots of practice will help with that, especially when you're nervous and up on stage. So getting rid of those ums and such as and your likes and your knows. You want all of those to be polished out by the time you are delivering your speech. So writing out your pitch ahead of time will help you with that. And you're going to memorize everything you say and practice it again and again and again to an audience or to a camera, so you can simulate what that competition space will look like and feel like to you. We've talked a ton here about word choice and why word choice matters. So simple words are clear words are kind words, and kind words are words we're going to care about, we're going to engage with, and we're going to remember. And so thinking about how you can simplify your research and your message for your audience's purposes will really be the key to creating an engaging 3MT competition message. And your research advisor, they're going to say to you, hey, you left out this detail, you left out this detail, and you didn't even talk about this other thing. You could have crammed in this other reference, and you could have mentioned this point. That's not necessarily the best practice here, folks. I mean, faculty, we aren't taught on good communication to broad audiences. We don't know all these best practices. And so you really want to think about destoning and hilling and honing and simplifying. That's really your key to success here. And you won't be complete. You won't get in every last detail, and that's okay. Because again, a pitch should leave your audience with follow-up questions, leave them wanting to approach you after that talk to learn more about what it is you're doing. And so that's okay to be incomplete so long as we're engaging and clear and convey, why is this important? How does it affect you? Why should you care about it? Here's a bit about what I did and what I found. And again, what are the benefits to society of my work? What's the big picture significance? And why will this matter at the end of the day? Those are the things we want to spend our time on. So I know we're at time here. I want you to put in the chat for me today. What was a tip from this talk today, from the work that we did together here, that really surprised you? What was something that was new to you or surprising or unexpected about what makes for good communication to broad audiences? You can share that out in the chat for me. Jessica says she appreciated the upgoer tool. Thank you. I'm glad you like that. It's a fun one. Nicholas also liked it. It's really hard. It's very challenging to get past, but it kind of becomes like a competition to be able to beat that. Okay, I see the oversimplification challenge. That's good. Right? We don't want to be inaccurate with what we're saying. We don't want to be misleading, but it's okay to be a little bit simpler and a little incomplete if it means that more people will understand what we're saying a little better. We've actually made better connection then with our audience than if we used all of that technical terms that they might not appreciate or understand. All right, thank you all. And you can tell me as well in the chat if you have any broad questions about 3MT in particular, how to be successful at 3MT, or thinking about communicating to public audiences in general. If you have questions, put them in the chat for me and we can address them here. And Jill says to everyone, don't forget to register, and she put the link in there for you. So there is a deadline to register. It's a really great, exciting competition. People have really gotten really positive feedback and good experiences from it before. So it's a fun competition.
And there is a deadline to register, which is this Friday. But again, if you register by 5 o'clock today, you will be entered into a raffle to win lots of good giveaways. So if you're going to register anyway, maybe take care of it right now.
I like that. Jessica has a question in the chat. She says, for the 3MT, should this be research that is complete? In other words, not about research in the proposal stage.
You want me to take that, Elise?
Sure.
I don't think it has to be complete. I think it's fine if you are part of the way in and you have your research topic and why it matters, and you know how you're going to, what methodology you're going to use and how you're going to complete it. I think we've had lots of successful 3MT competitors with that formula.
Our follow-up question is, for complete research, can it be previously published? And I would say the answer to that is certainly yes. It's okay if this is published. You're welcome, Jessica. Yeah, I think we've heard some good talks before that were on research that was, early stage or ongoing, and I think you can do that really well. If you think about that, cartoon I showed in the beginning, where it's 1 minute is on the how you did your research and what you found, but the other 2 minutes are, why is this significant and why does it matter and why is this important and what are the benefits to the broader public and what are the benefits potentially to your audience? Well, that you can really think about then, minutes 1 and 3 there are things that you can know even if the work is in really early stages. You might know why your work is of broad significance or likely to be impactful. Minute 2 there could just be, this is how I'm going to investigate these questions of what we're planning to do and what we're planning to look at and what I think we'll see. All right, another question here. What are the general criteria while judging a participant? The evaluation criteria that the judges use. Jill, you want to take that one as well?
Sure. I don't have the rubric in front of me right now, but generally they're going to evaluate the content of your presentation. Did you explain your research in a way that a lay audience could understand it without using jargon, without being technical? How clear was your content? They're going to evaluate the delivery of content. So these public speaking tips that Elise just went over, is there flow to your presentation? Is it engaging? Do I find myself wanting more? Is it compelling? Do you make a good case for why I should listen to you? And do you make it easy for me to listen to you? And then they'll also judge your slide. So, and I can share with you, after seeing now 3 different full 3MT presentations, people go wrong by including way too much information on their slide. Sort of like the story about the all blue slide, that was actually an excellent visual. So does the slide back up what you're saying, or does it distract me from trying to figure out what you're saying? So those are the general criteria. I have to pull out the rubric to get how many points everything is worth.
Yeah, I don't know about the points part, but you're exactly right. I did pull up our judging criteria. So the handouts I put in the chat included a coaching handout, is what it's called. It has the judging criteria on there. It's exactly what Jill covered. Comprehension and content is one area. Engagement and communication is the other. On comprehension and content, they're looking at things like, did the speaker avoid scientific jargon, explain terminology, provide adequate background information to illustrate points? And that's exactly what we were talking about today as best practices. And then under engagement, it's things like, did the oration make the audience want to know more? We talked about that as being a sign that you communicated effectively. Were they able to convey enthusiasm for their research? Did they have sufficient stage presence? Did the slide enhance the presentation? So you can look at all the kind of variants of those questions there, but it's essentially like what you said and how you said it, and then the slide visual. I can share that link again. So there is a message box handout in there you guys can use to kind of workshop your pitch, and there's the coaching handout has the judging criteria on there. Good question, Frida. All right, well, I think that was a great session. Thank you all for all of your engagement here. I like seeing everything you wrote into the chat about, your experiences using the Upgoer 5, what you found worked, what didn't, what surprised you, jargon you've seen in your work. I think you guys are going to be really pleased with how participating in 3MT can really advance your communication skills and how much benefit you'll get out of this experience. It's something that really, I think, keeps paying dividends to you. Anything else you want to share with this group, Jill?
No, this is great. Just really looking forward to seeing you all try this out and deliver your research. This is a really important event because graduate students at UNC Charlotte are doing tremendous research, and I want high-profile judges to get a glimpse of this. So just really encouraging you to put yourself out there and give this a try. I think you'll be glad you did.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you all for your participation and engagement today. I'm really looking forward to seeing those of you who participate in 3MT, seeing what you do, and to seeing those finalists in our competition.
Thank you.